Between the years when the oceans drank Atlantis, and the gleaming cities, and the years of the rise of the sons of Ares, there was an age undreamed of when shining kingdoms lay spread across the world like blue mantles beneath the stars. Welcome to Antiquity X. I'm your host, Dr. Judd Burton. And here at Antiquity X, we ask strange questions about our strange past. As always, if you like the content, click a like, subscribe, and share. And today, we'll be looking at the question of the Magi, this ancient mystical order. And you may be wondering why I waited until February to do this, and there's purpose in my waiting, because the Magi did not visit the Holy Family directly at the birth of Jesus, but rather a number of years afterwards when Jesus was a toddler. And so we will take a deep dive today into these wise men of the East, this ancient order that we are so familiar with in terms of the Christmas story. Now, for answers, we of course turn to the Gospels, and specifically Matthew chapter 2, in this portion of the nativity story that Matthew relates to us. Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12 is the passage if you would like to go and read it, but I would draw your attention to the fact that these wise men had been watching the stars. They were astronomers. They were astrologers, and we'll get into that in just a moment, with emphasis on the cosmos as an astronomical clock, a revelatory instrument of God's will. But there's also a word I would draw to your attention used here to describe the age of Jesus, and then, of course, the timing of the Magi's visit, and that is paideon, toddler, when Jesus was probably 2 or 3. Now, Magi is the Latinized Greek word. The Greek word is magoi, that's plural, magos, for magician or astrologer. There seems to be some indication that this is a borrowed word from the Persian magus and the related Avestan language, the word magano, which was coincidentally the priestly caste into which the prophet Zoroaster was born, and somehow this remained a word that described this order. And of course, the learning would include astronomy and mathematics and all kinds of literature in the ancient world. And as I pointed out a moment ago, these fellows were astronomers. And in the ancient world, that line between astronomy and astrology was not nearly as sharply drawn as it is today, that is, between our hard sciences and the more esoteric kinds of applications. Wise men, interestingly enough, in the King James Version, is identical to the idiom that we find in Daniel chapter 2. And Daniel, of course, you'll remember, was one of the Jewish captives, a book of the same name of his, a prophetic book in the Old Testament. But he was one of the Jewish captives in Babylon. And, of course, Nebuchadnezzar took him and his compatriots, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and basically sent them to school to serve in his court. as advisors and counselors as part of this order of wise men. And so they basically were getting PhDs in all things Babylonian in terms of their culture, diplomacy, and language. And as of course you can see that they excelled in those offices. This goes a long way towards explaining if the order was headquarters basically in Babylon, of while later generations of wise men understood the prophecies about the Messiah. And while Babylon, the city of Babylon, the kingdom of Babylon, this would have been in the Daniel context, would have been the Neo-Babylonian Empire. But while Babylon, in the time of the first century AD, may well have been the headquarters of this ancient order of mystical scholars, there are other possibilities. Certainly the Greeks and the Romans inherited much of their astrological knowledge from the Babylonians, from the people of Mesopotamia. They were constantly talking about and singing the praises of the so-called Babylonian numbers. But there are some other possible locations, although Babylon is at the top of the list. Some rather interesting ones like China, in the extreme, but also parts of Arabia. Yemen has also been suggested as a possibility because there were, in fact, Jewish kings who were ruling in the kingdom of Yemen at the time. Now, another question that inevitably surfaces about the Magi is, were there three? Well, that is generally a number that's derived from the number of gifts that are brought, the traditional gold, frankincense, and myrrh. But we don't know that there were three. More than two, but there may have been 5, there may have been 10, there may have been a whole retinue of them. We simply don't know. We're just given the plural in that particular passage in Matthew, that there were magoi, there were multiple wise men who came, inquired of Herod, and then sought out the young Jesus in order to pay homage and worship. The traditional names in the West given to these 3 wise men are Melchior, Gaspar, and Balthazar, representative traditionally, respectively, of Persia, India, and Babylon. And there are apocryphal texts, like the Acts of Thomas, that talk about his missionizing India, and that may be the case that there were people from multiple countries who studied to become these wise men, these learned people of the East. And what were they following? Well, of course, the Star of Bethlehem, which likely, although it is a matter of some debate to this day, was likely some sort of planetary conjunction that they recognize as heralding a shift in the political and supernatural trajectory of the world. Here recently, we got to see a conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn that was probably similar to what the wise men were observing at the time or in the wake of Jesus' birth. What these conjunctions of planets like Jupiter and Saturn herald are these kinds of changes, but it may also have been a conjunction of Jupiter, Venus, and the star Regulus. At any rate, Jupiter, which was known as Nibiru, a Marduk star in Babylonian astrology, seems to have been at play here. Now, what's always struck me about the wise men that's so interesting is this combination of faith and learning. They were brilliant, yes, obviously, very talented, learned men, but they were also pliant. They had malleable spirits so that God could work on their hearts and use their learning to guide them to the young Messiah, and to be a testimony to history in many ways, to the efficacy of the story and the validity of the story of the Messiah. God, of course, speaking to them in dreams and all manner of signs and wonders. And indeed, even to this day, it's something that I've tried to strive for is this marriage of faith and scholarship. And wise men, consequently, still follow him, are still drawn to Jesus to this day. Well, I hope this gives you a better idea about the order of the Magi and who exactly they were, and perhaps inspire you to pursue your own journey of the marriage of faith and scholarship and become a more ardent student of the Bible, and to be pliant to God's will and to search for those signs and wonders in the stars and heavens, because they do, as the Bible says, reveal God's plan for the past, the present, and indeed the future. And this story also helps us to carry along the Christmas story and the themes of Christmas as well. And I hope that in studying the Magi, that this will be a blessing to you. Tune in